We're thinking in this summer period where our services are slightly shorter about some favourite psalms. The Football Premier League has started yesterday or Friday, and we're all very pleased about that, aren't we? Either people go yes or, oh no, not again, all that rubbish on TV. And I've got tickets to go and watch Arsenal versus Leeds next Saturday, but I can't go because Tonbridge Angels, who I'm the club chaplain, are playing at home. So my wife Jo and my son Noah are going to go instead of me. I love going up to watch Arsenal games. There's two routes I go. I either go to Highbury and Islington Underground Station, and that's Noah's favourite journey because we walk past the Hope Cafe where you can have a fry-up for about $6.95, and it's absolutely fabulous. But my favourite journey is to go up to the Arsenal tube station. It's a long, thin tunnel coming out of the station, and then you see all of these people, as you can see there on the screen in front of you, buying hot dogs and burgers and selling Arsenal scarves and all kinds of dodgy memorabilia, and then you go round to the ground. My favourite part of that journey is walking up the long, thin tunnel where I have a moment of prayer, and I thank God for my granddad, who from the age of 13 took me to watch Arsenal games when I was too young, and he would take me up there. Get there at 1 o'clock, Neil, for a 3 o'clock kick-off. We can never be too early. Well, no, Grandad, actually, that is too early. We're just standing outside on our own, and no one else is there. We could get there at 2:30 like normal people. No, 1 o'clock, I was in the Navy. I know what we do. I thank God as we walk up there in my prayers for my friend Matthew Glover, who I took to an Arsenal game, and when he first saw that green turf, changed his allegiance from Liverpool to Arsenal on the spot. And would always have a burger before the game, and one that they were selling cheap that had been keeping warm for 3 hours after the game, and then wondered why he had a dodgy tummy on the way home. He died when I was 19 years old, and he was 20, and his grave with an Arsenal badge is over there in the graveyard. And when I walk up that tunnel, I thank God for him. And when I walk up that tunnel, I thank God in prayer for my dad, who came to watch 2 Arsenal games in his whole life. They won 6-0 and 3-0. He thought that's what they did every single week. It's a journey for me, a journey that's going forward to the future, but it's also going back to the past and people who have meant a lot to me. Psalm 120 that we're going to look at this morning is one of the Psalms of Ascent. They're Psalms 120 to 134 that were sang by the Jewish people as they made their journeys back to Jerusalem for the 3 great ancient festivals of their people, when they would remember the good things that God had done, the people that God had placed in their lives to help them. There's no obvious process to these psalms. There's no line of thinking that they're heading towards. They're just all saying pretty much the same thing. We want to go to be with God in Jerusalem. We need God. Without God, we are stuffed. We've been displaced, and we want to dwell with God again. The Psalms, if I can remind you, are not systematic teaching about God. They are human responses to God in the midst of good and bad situations that people find themselves in. So we shouldn't take every line of every single psalm as a biblical truth that we should follow. We don't say when King David says of his enemies, I wish you would take their pregnant women and rip open their wombs and smash their baby's head on the rocks. We don't teach that as biblical truth, do we? Do we? Good. Thank the Lord for that, because people rip scripture out, usually at proof text, and do all kinds of crazy stuff. These psalms are responses to God, saying, God, this is how I feel, this is where I'm at, and I need you. And so every year, 3 times a year, as they go up to Jerusalem, they sing these psalms of ascent. Let's watch Psalm 120 together.
I call on the Lord in my distress, and he answers me. Save me, Lord, from lying lips and deceitful tongues. What will he do to you? And what besides, you deceitful tongue? He will punish you with a warrior's sharp arrows, with burning coals of the broom bush. Woe to me that I dwell in Meshach, that I live among the tents of Kedar. Too long have I lived among those who hate peace. I am for peace, but when I speak, they are for war.
Ominous music under that one, wasn't there? Not the usual light music, and it captures the feeling of that psalm. James Almays, in his Bible commentary, says it's a strange and difficult little poem. Someone from the church here last Sunday went down to Bexhill-on-Sea. That's where Joe and I were for our first church. And I remember being down there. I would prayer walk along the seafront most days. And there was one day I was having a really difficult time at the church and nothing seemed to be working that I was trying to do. And I felt a pressure because they said, we want you to come in and get young families and children into the church. And so I departed from my usual prayer walk, and it was a low tide, and I walked right out onto these rocks that you can see in the picture. And I walked right to the end of them, and it was a rainy day slightly, and the breeze was hard, and the spray of the water was splashing up in me. And I said, God, I don't know what to do. No one else could hear me, just a few old people going along on their motor things on the seafront, thinking, when is the ice cream van opening? It's November, the ice cream's shut until May, get over it. And I just remember it was one of those points in my life where I said, God, I don't know what to do. I've tried everything. Nothing seems to be working. God, where are you? Please do something. I know that none of you have been in that moment of distress. Have you? I call on the Lord in my distress, verse 1 says. Distress in Hebrew can be trouble, calamity, anguish. And he answers me. Save me, Lord, from lying lips and from deceitful, lazy, lax, slack tongues. What will he do to you? And what more besides, you deceitful tongue? He will punish you with a warrior's sharp arrows and burning, glowing coals of the broom bush. The Septuagint, which is the Greek version of the Hebrew Old Testament, the most accurate that we have, says for that last bit, he will with burning with the coals of the desert. The psalmist says, if you're distressed, go to God. Don't go to God when you've worked through your distress and you're calm and balanced and every day with Jesus again. When you're in distress, go to God, because God answers me. This is different, answering me, to God gives me exactly what I want. I remember a principal of a Bible college, and he had 3 young men, all came to him and said, God has told me that I'm going to marry this woman. And the principal was saying, well, God kind of told all 3 of you that you're going to marry this woman. At least 2 of you have probably got it wrong. Sometimes we pray that God will just give us what we want. And sometimes we can actually look back, can't we, and be thankful that God didn't give us what we wanted. I've got a friend who was almost engaged to a woman, and he said, when I met her 40 years later, I was so thankful that I didn't end up with her. She's lovely, but I'm so glad I ended up with the wife that I had. But at the time, I felt that God wasn't giving me what I wanted. But 4 decades later, thank you, God. God answers his prayer and saves him from deceitful tongues and lying lips. Lying and deceitful people are often shown as weapons of social hostility in the Bible. They will bring down communities. James Almays says, lies subvert life. Deceit undermines it. The soul is left insecure and damaged. You ever had anyone say anything about you and it unnerves you? We had deacons meetings, which are volunteer leaders at my last church, and I banned a phrase in those meetings. I said, no one is ever allowed to say in these meetings, some people have said. Why, Neil? I said, because if you say to me, some people have said they don't like your socks, then I'll go to church next Sunday thinking, well, which ones is it? It could be any of them that don't like my socks, let alone my knees. Shoulders, knees and toes, knees and toes. If we think people aren't happy, share how many, share a rough age, share a gender, but don't just say some people have said, because that's gossip. That brings people down. He says in verses 3 and 4, they want war. And if they want war, they're going to get war. Because people that want war will always look for it and will always find it. We were at my mum's house last night, celebrating my sister's 25th wedding anniversary with my brother-in-law. And it reminded me that our next door neighbour, when I was growing up as a kid, used to run his house at the weekends as a place where men would go for certain things. I remember once at about 2 in the morning, my dad standing outside his front door, my dad in his dressing gown, not roped together, a policeman that looked about 12 years old beside my dad, and my dad having a heated discussion with this man that was running this place in his house. And he said to the policeman, "Are you going to sort this out?" And the policeman said, "I've got no evidence, I'm sorry." My dad said, "So what if I hit him then?" And he said, "Well, then I would have to arrest you, Mr. Durling." And I thought, "Dad, please don't hit him, this is getting awkward." It was horrendous for years. I remember getting ready for exams thinking I cannot sleep because of the noise I can hear next door. One day, the guy came home on a Friday, he put some chips in a pan on the hob, and all of a sudden his kitchen was on fire. My dad, not in dressing gown this time, just in normal clothes, went down and dragged him unconscious out of his kitchen and put him in the garden and put out the fire. And at that point the man said, "I need to get my life together." And he did. And he moved on. But those years with that neighbour were so tough. Verse 5 says, "Woe to me that I dwell in Meshach, that I live, I dwell, I abide, I live among, I stay among the tents of Kedar. Too long have I lived among." That word among means sojourn, to live as an alien, to dwell as a stranger, to imply less social rights than a native. "Too long have I lived among those who hate peace." He says, "My soul has been a sojourner." My whole life, in the Message version, it says, lived camping among quarrelling neighbours. I want peace. I want God. And all I've got is people that are giving me grief, says the psalmist. This is a cry of lament. We can lament with God. We can say to God, for crying out loud, what is going on? Maybe your neighbour is your literal neighbour. Maybe your neighbour is your boss or your contemporary at work. Maybe your neighbour is someone that you have lunch with as a family every single week. Maybe your neighbour is something in you that you battle with regularly. Meshach and Kedar are the names of distant, alien desert places that for the Jews were associated with wars and warring people. They are a metaphor for social strife. There is nothing good or beneficial for life about them. One writer says, it's a poignant expression of pilgrims' pain over the world from which they come. It puts that world in sharpest contrast to the peace they desire and seek in coming to Zion, to Jerusalem. We were on holiday a few weeks ago, and I didn't get much of a tan. It was too hot for me in Egypt in the heat of the day, and I would sit there and just check the gossip columns in the football to see who was signing who. And before I would log into that, bless you, I'd go on the BBC News and I would see Gaza at the top every single time. As I sat on my sun lounger with my cool, cold glass of water, I'd see Gaza, Gaza, Gaza. Starving children, women with no hope, men with no future. And the juxtaposition was sharp between where I laid and what I read. The psalmist finishes the psalm, I am for peace. Peace in Hebrew can mean safety, prosperity, well-being, intactness, wholeness, satisfaction. You ever had a day where you sat down on the couch and thought, my bones ache from the gardening. I feel the warmth of the sun on my brow. My stomach's full. My thirst is quenched. The kids are quiet. It's a good day. I feel satisfied. I feel at peace. I am for peace, says the psalmist. But when I speak, they are for war. I want shalom, says the psalmist, which is a hopeful wholeness of life. When we read I am for peace, in Hebrew it is literally I am peace. It's not even that he just wants to be for it, he wants to embody peace. Graham Scroggie says, peace is not merely something to pray and work for, it is something to be. But even the most peaceful person's kind words can bring about war. The psalmist has undergone a bitter experience and commits to still being peace. In the midst of lies and deceit and wars, he refuses to retaliate in kind. Why is this one of my favourite psalms? I've read this psalm almost daily as part of my morning prayers this year in this book, the Glenstall Book of Daily Prayer. And when I first stumbled across that psalm within the morning prayers, I couldn't leave it and kept just going back to that. And for the last 8 months or so, it's been in them every single morning. Why? Because I've grown tired of world leaders who lie. I'm just bored with it. Are you? And I'm not judging them, I'm not making out I'm better than them, but I'm tired of it. I want leaders for our countries who do what they say they're going to do. I want leaders who will put justice and peace above what kind of deals they're going to get for their nation, don't you? That's what we vote for. That's why we go to that little thing and put our tick on it and put it in the box, because we want peace. We don't want war. And when I read that psalm, I thought, God, this absolutely taps into what I am feeling now. Not in a self-righteous way, not in a I've got it all together way, but just I'm tired of hearing lies and deceit and seeing war. And I thought, God, I want to be peace. In the conversations that we have as a church, where people can throw things at one another if we're not careful. And I don't think we do that here, thank you. But I want to be a man of peace, not of lies and deceit. I want to be truthful in what I say, what I do, and how I live. When we were on holiday, we went to the Sinai Desert for our wedding anniversary, as I told you last week. It was like something out of Star Wars. It was 40 degrees in heat. We were in a Jeep throwing us all over the place. And then we got to this crescent where we got out and had photos taken. There was a guy there who was trying to sell us photos. You know, he's like, "You're a beautiful family." And I'm thinking, oh, I like this. Come together. Click, click, click. And he had Joe and I holding hands and kissing. It was all very awkward in front of other people. And we didn't buy any of the photos. And as we were standing there and the guide was telling us about the desert and what went on there, this little boy about this tall, covered in dust, covered in desert dust so that you couldn't tell the colour of his T-shirt. He was coming up round us and tapping us on the sides. And I thought, I'm trying to experience the Sinai Desert, clear off. And he's got these little bracelets, and he's holding these bracelets, handmade. And I'm thinking, go away. And I heard the guide in Egyptian say something very sharp to him, which I imagine was, "Can you please go away, young man? You're interfering with their experience of the Sinai Desert. God bless you." Or something. And the boy didn't leave. The boy was like a magnet to the tourists. And I'm ignoring him. And Joe said to me, "Neil, have you got any money?" I'm like, "Oh, yeah, I've got some money." He's like, can I buy a bracelet? I said, the guide said, don't buy a... Guide said, ignore him. Joe said, "I want to buy a bracelet." And I got it out. It was way too much money for the quality of the bracelet. And I gave it to Joe. And then we all walked off back to our Jeeps. And Joe stood there with this little boy. And she gave 2 bills I gave her, gives him 1, and gives him the second. Like massively generous. And he said, "Thank you." Gave Joe the bracelet. When we got in the Jeep, I said something to Joe like, "That was magnificent." So I thought, if Jesus was in our tourist group, I think he'd have bought the bracelet. He'd have let himself be ripped off to give this kid some hope. If the psalmist was in our tourist group, I think he'd have said, I'm surrounded by lies, deceit and war, but I am peace. Shalom, young man. Take the money.